So we're delighted to have a range of speakers tonight for this webinar and Q&A. We've got 6 speakers from different organisations, and I guess the key thing to say there is that, like most of life's big challenges, you know, this puzzle of kind of how do we enable active travel to school, you know, it needs a lot of different organisations working together. So we're really delighted that we can hear from lots of different organisations tonight. So the agenda of what we're going to hear from, who we're going to hear from tonight, I'll just go through that first. So we're going to hear, we're going to open up with Liz Saul from Transport for Greater Manchester, and Liz is going to give us a bit of a scene setter about where we are on active travel and some of the things that are going on here. We're then going to hear from Kaz Ward from Walk Ride Greater Manchester. She's going to talk a bit about what it's like holding a school street and some tips. Then we're going to go to Dan from Living Streets. He's going to talk about some of the other things that you can do, often at the same time as holding a street, that really help the whole community get involved in a school. We're delighted to be able to hear from Cheryl Ford Lydon, who's from ModeShift Stars, which who one of the major players in the travel planning programme. And we've got Matt Pearce and Jenny Baby from Sustrans, who can tell us a bit about the data and what the data tells us about school streets. Then we're going to have about 20 minutes for questions. So we've got a lot to get through in terms of content, and what would be great in terms of sort of house rules, if you keep your mics off during the speaking bit, the content bit, there'll be time for questions at the end. But what's really handy is if you post your questions and points in the chat as we go, do feel free to kind of just post things in there. We are going to be collating your questions as we go, but to answer at the end. But also the teams who are doing the speaking tonight, you know, will be debriefing, and if there are things that cropped up, we can kind of take those back into our teams and work on them. I guess tonight is going to hopefully give you a bit of an overview about everything, and there may be things that crop up tonight, you know, to do with individual schools or schemes, and that may be best done, you know, in follow-up meetings, and we'll have to keep tonight quite general. So lastly, one of our team, Charlotte, who is monitoring the chat, is also taking your comments and putting them on a Jamboard, and a Jamboard is just a fancy name for a kind of place where we can put your comments, so that makes it easier for us to look at them afterwards. So Charlotte will put that in the chat as well, the link to that, if you want to get involved there. So that's it from me. I'm going to invite Liz Saul now from TFGM onto the speaker stage, and Liz will kick us off. And I'm afraid it's one of those, we've got one presentation, so I'll be moving the slides on, so you will have to hear next slide a bit. And welcome, Liz, over to you.
Thanks, Claire. Good evening, everyone. So part of my role is working with schools and residents in Greater Manchester to enable more journeys to be made by walking or cycling. So if we think about why is this important for the school run, not only is it the most reliable way to travel, but it's much more fun. It enables us to spend time with our families. We also know that physical activity encourages healthy growth and development, and it improves our mood by reducing stress and anxiety. It also normalises and builds exercise into the daily routine, and there's a positive relationship between physical activity and academic performance. Also, the streets around the school are less congested, and children who walk or wheel to school from an early age have more road sense and an improved ability to travel independently and safely. It's also good for the environment too. So we're improving our air quality and making the streets more attractive to move around in. There are so many other benefits, but as Claire said, we've only got an hour this evening, so I'm just going to move on now to look at the local statistics. Nationally, 1 in 5 cars that are on the road during peak morning times are involved in the school run. In Greater Manchester, we know that almost 1/3 of journeys that are less than 1 kilometre are made by car. We've got 75% of primary school children who travel less than 2 kilometres to school, and pre-pandemic, the trips to education generated estimated 730,000 trips by car per school day. There's also a significant number of our children in Greater Manchester who are classed as inactive or obese, and over 1/3 of primary schools are affected by poor air quality. And whilst I know that might sound pretty gloomy, we do know that walking or wheeling to school can help address some of these issues. But is that what the people of Greater Manchester want? Well, let's look if there's demand for this on our next slide. We think that the answer is yes. we've had research from the Walking and Cycling Index recently that found that there was strong support for the creation of more low traffic neighbourhoods and more school streets. There was a desire from both parents and children to walk or wheel to school rather than go by car. There was 73% of parents wanting their children to travel actively, even though only 54% currently did. And 48% of children said they wanted to cycle to school, even though 2% only currently did. Okay, so looking at this, we think there's demand, but is there opportunity? So again, the Walking and Cycling Index found that 84% of households within Greater Manchester live within an 800-metre walk or wheel of a primary school. Now, we have to recognise that there's a possibility that might not be their primary school, but we did say before that 75% of primary school children travel less than 2 kilometres to school. As well as this, over 2/3 of households with children have at least one child's bike. And the last TRAD, so this is the Greater Manchester Travel Diaries that were done before COVID, they found that 71% of people picking up or dropping off young people were pretty wedded to their type of transport, and at the time would not or could not consider any alternatives. But 12% recognised that walking was a viable alternative for them to take the children to school. So again, this suggests that there's an opportunity there to engage with this cohort to sort of enable that travel behaviour with this audience. So we've got the demand, we've got the opportunity, but how do we do it? Well, there's lots of ways to enable schools and communities to walk or wheel more. I would always recommend first doing some research, so talking to stakeholders, your parents, your carers, your residents, those in the community, local councillors, local council groups, and understand what are the barriers and opportunities in the area. Also find out what other people have done, try and learn from them. There's lots of things that you can participate in. There's confidence builders such as bikeability training, setting up walking and cycling buses, tying into national campaigns such as Sustrans's Big Walk and Wheel, Living Streets Walk to School Week, Clean Air Day, and so on. And whenever doing these types of activities, I suggest using gamification to engage pupils and families to engage. So offer competitions and rewards that suit your school ethos. As well as all of this fun stuff, also demonstrating a commitment to keep your school travel plan up to date, or introducing park and stride locations for those who can't walk or wheel the whole way, or maybe even develop a safe parking charter for staff and parents and carers to sign up to. For those kind of physical barriers that stop people, why not provide parking and storage for scooters, cycles and wellies, or maybe consider a school street? Again, there's so much more that can be done, such as setting up an eco-council or getting accredited through Motive Stars, but I can see Claire's eyes on me through this machine. So I'm going to move on to my last slide, which is to show what TFGM is doing to enable active travel on the school run and see how school streets fits into all of this. So as you can see, we're currently doing a range of projects and programs. I've put some of them on this slide. I'm not going to go through each one in detail because we just don't have the time, but you will be sent information on all of these projects and programs after the meeting, and you'd be very welcome to get in touch with me if you had any further questions on them. I'm really happy to say that I feel that we've got a broad range of engagement with schools. So we've got toolkits to support staff and students to undertake activity independently with light touch support from TFGM. We have more slightly hands-on projects such as Own the Ride, which offer cycle confidence to secondary school students. And with this, we commission a third-party supplier to deliver bespoke training. The schools then commit to students to participate, and we evaluate through impact surveys. And then we've got on the other end of the scale, the more intensive support. So for example, our Youth Travel Ambassador pilot. This is where we have an officer whose sole job is to work within secondary schools to empower young people to research, plan and deliver travel campaigns that are unique to their school. So amongst all of this activity as well, we have our school streets pilot. And just to clarify, when I say a school street, I mean closing the road outside of a school to non-essential traffic. This is usually for a very short part of the day during pick-up and drop-off times and is only in effect during term times. This is being funded through central government with an ambition to trial delivery of around 40 school streets in Greater Manchester. 7 have already been delivered in Stockport, we've got about 3 in Wigan, and a large number across other boroughs are planned for September. This pilot has seen some great media coverage so far, and it's resulted in lots of questions about school streets, which is why we've put on this webinar. So I'm going to swiftly hand over to Kaz Ward from Walk Ride Wally Range to hear what it's like to actually hold a school street.
Thanks, Liz. Okay, so as Liz says, I'm from Walk Ride, and we've been supporting quite a lot of schools across Greater Manchester with some of their school streets. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what it's like to run a school street, which actually is a pretty enjoyable event. And as you can probably see in some of these pictures, it's very different to some of those kind of car-packed streets that you see outside the school normally. Okay, next slide, please, Claire. Thank you. So, as Liz explained, a school street is when you close off the school roads to traffic during drop-off and pick-up times. And actually, any school can hold a school street. So what that means is you can usually start off with kind of a one-off trial. So that's just one specific day when you close the streets during that drop-off and pick-up times. Now, there are different sorts of school streets. So the ones that Liz mentioned were the pilot for the 40 schools across Greater Manchester, and that's actually over a longer period. But outside of that, any other school can also do this if they want to give it a go. So the way that you do this is that you need to apply to your highways department in the council. And what they'll do is they'll give you what's called a temporary traffic regulation order, which is just a fancy name for when you're given the authority to close those school streets around the school zone at set times. Now, in my view, it's quite a guarded secret how you actually apply for that. So if it is something you want to do and you're a parent or a teacher, I'd suggest that the best thing to do is try and find out who your neighbourhood officer is in the council. And if you don't know who that is, you can ask your local councillor and just contact them, and they'll be able to put you in touch with the process for doing your school street. So before you can do a school street, and again, it doesn't matter who you are, it could be a parent or a teacher or a parent governor, the school really needs to be on board. And it is different for different schools about who's involved. But as a minimum, you do need the head teacher to be engaged and enthusiastic about that. And hopefully it's part of a wider plan around active travel that they're doing. And you do need someone probably who's a point of contact within the school to work with. So this might be a teacher, or it might be the school business manager, for example. So once you've got that, and the head teacher applies for the traffic order for the school. And before you do that, so what you're going to have to do is make sure you know which streets you want to close, between which times, and where you're going to divert the traffic during those times. So just a point of clarification here, and I have put it on the slide because I think it can be a little bit confusing. So you can have a temporary school street, which is a trial school street that you can do up to 3 times a year, and you get what's called a temporary traffic regulation order. You can have an experimental school street with an experimental traffic regulation order, and that's normally over a longer period. So that's what's happening with the pilots that Liz mentioned. So it's going to be over a period of 6 months, and they can do that every day if they want to. And then finally, once you've all done that, okay, it can become a permanent thing, and you can do it every day going forward. Oh, hang on, not quite finished there, Claire. We just go back one sec. So there is a bit of planning to do here. So organising, you probably will need because you're going to close the streets, you will need to have some people who are going to help you with managing that closure. So that's usually done with volunteers. Now that could be residents, could be parents, students if they're older, could be community groups, and often we do get our local councillors to come down. You can see a couple of them from Whalley Range in the pictures. And what I'd say is you need at least 2 volunteers per part of the road closure, and probably a couple to roam around. Next slide, please. So the next thing to be aware of is communication. So it's really important that that you do communicate, and that is the key to a successful school street. And the more you can let people know what's going on in advance and why, the more people you will get on board. So I'd certainly recommend, for example, that you put a note through all the residents' doors, and that's not just those that might be living within the school zone, but also some of the roads around that are adjacent to the school zone. It's important that they also know that they're able to get in and out during that time, and also that deliveries, emergency services, utilities can get in, for example. You probably also want to reduce the traffic on that school street day. So it's really important as well that you make sure that all the parents know about the school street. Now, in my experience, that takes more than one communication. So the school will probably email all the parents to let them know and encourage them to walk or ride on that day rather than drive. Probably about 5% of them will read that email. So then they might want to send a text on a weekly basis up to the run up. And the other thing we found also quite useful is actually if you do have time to go outside the school and actually hand leaflets to the parents in the cars up to the school street. So you just getting another load of people who know what's going on. Another way of communicating is that on the actual school street day, it's a good opportunity to talk to parents and have that conversation about why active travel is important. So I've got a bit of an example there of some leaflets that we've created. It's also a good opportunity to talk about bad driving practice. So whether that's parking on the pavement or whether it's sitting there with your idling running. We've got templates for all these communications that we will be sharing with you after. Next slide, please, Claire. So finally, around school streets is about managing those school streets on the day. So as I mentioned in your application, you will need to know what streets you're going to close. So you'll have to be able to provide a map in your application that shows the closures and a little bit like you can see on here, where the diversions might be for drivers that you're going to tell people. You'll also need to put all this information into a volunteer briefing. And this is something that you'll deliver to your volunteers before you start the school street. In the volunteer briefing, you'll also want to tell them about things they need to do to keep safe and manage any issues. Again, we've got a template for that. Another thing that you might need for a temporary school street is some signage. So you do have to have a road closed sign for a temporary school street closure. At Walk Ride, we've got a whole load of those, so we can always lend them out if anyone wants to do it, and you can also get them through your council. And finally, you might want to think about who you're going to allow to be exempt from coming in and out of the school street. As I said, that might be residents, carers, utilities, emergencies, deliveries. And one thing that we've found works quite well is if we do give the residents an exemption badge that they can put in their car, it makes them feel a little bit more involved. So I think, you know, my final thing to say is that when you do a school street, you will enjoy it. And what you'll notice is that you've got a lot of very happy and relaxed children arriving at school, very different to those children that arrive trying to navigate their way around really badly parked cars and poor driving. So that's about how you actually do a school street. And as Liz mentioned at the beginning, there's a lot more that we can do as well as a school street. So that's one important part of reducing traffic. I'm now going to hand over to Dan. Dan is one of the GM project coordinators at Living Streets, and he's going to tell you a little bit about behaviour change and how we actually go about reducing the number of parents who drive to school.
Brilliant, thanks Kaz. Hello everybody, yes, I'm Dan from Living Streets. So the hope is that this section will highlight some of the behaviour change work taking place in primary schools that can help with the overall success of a school street. So I'm going to briefly introduce some of the behaviour change work that we are doing at Living Streets, and I'm going to frame that in the context of one particular school. The school in question is Guardian Angels Primary School in Bury. And the reason for this is because this particular school is set to have a school street in place in October this year. So the intention is that the following slides will demonstrate how the work we deliver can be the prelude to the implementation of a school street. Really just to effectively warm things up, get the local community involved and on side, and also to incentivise children and families to want to travel actively to school. So next slide, please, Claire. So to start with, I just want to talk about sort of Living Street's flagship behaviour change programme, which is called WOW. Now, WOW is a pupil-led initiative for primary school children, where children self-report how they get to school every day using the interactive WOW travel tracker, which you can see a little girl using it there in the bottom right picture of the screen. If children travel actively, so if they walk, cycle, scoot or park and stride at least once a week for a month, they are then rewarded with a collectible badge. And there are 11 badges to collect throughout the school year. We also hold a badge design competition where pupils design the badges based around a chosen theme. So the theme for the next academic year is Walking Through Time, and you can see some of the winning badges there, what I've included on that slide. So WOW is simple to run and it's free for schools across Greater Manchester, thanks to funding from the Department for Transport, although places are quite limited. So if you are interested or you're linked with a school who's interested, do ask them to kind of drop us a line and tell them more. On average, WOW schools see a 30% reduction in car journeys taken to the school gates and a 23% increase in walking rates. So that is, as I say, that is sort of the flagship walk to school programme that we deliver through Living Streets, and we're working with probably approaching 150 schools across Greater Manchester with that at present. Can I get the next slide, please, Claire? So moving on from the walk to school programme, we also offer additional, more intensive support to some of the primary schools that take part in WOW. Now, that intensive support is often in the form of a school route audit. Now, a school route audit is a method for evaluating the quality of the walking environment around a school. So it includes typical sort of regular routes that are walked to school. It'll include streets, public spaces, parks, and other spaces that are used by pupils, parents, carers, and teachers on their journeys to and from school. The key point with the school route audit is to capture the viewpoint of those people familiar with the area, those people who walk those routes on a regular basis. And an audit normally involves setting up a working group which comprises those people so that we can gather their views and their input. So one such school route audit was carried out at Guardian Angels, the school in Bury, back in January this year. And a number of recommendations were made off the back of the findings. Now, one of the key recommendations on that particular route audit was the provision for the displacement of traffic for the coming school street. That was a big concern by a lot of the residents. A lot of the teachers were also wondering what's going to happen to these potential people who may be coming to school by car. So if I can just move on to the final slide, please, Claire. So this segues nicely into the work we then did with Guardian Angels to explore if there was need for what we call park and stride sites, and if so, where would we look to set them up and how could we promote them? So the first step in this process was to do a postcode plot of all the pupils to identify where they travelled in from. So that's that image in the top left there. And it was really just for us to get an understanding of the geographical spread. Now, it was identified that with this particular school, over 57% of pupils lived beyond an 800-metre radius. So that's what we class as sort of typical door-to-door walking distance. With some pupils were living sort of up to 14 kilometres away from the school. So there was a certain need to look at alternative park and stride provisions. We could also see that those that travelled a distance to school approached the school from a variety of different directions as well. So as such, we carried out a piece of work and we identified 4 park and stride sites. A couple were at local council car parks. One was at a local retail park. And they were all within a 10-minute walking distance from the school. We created a map which promoted the park and stride sites, and we circulated that to our parents. And we also delivered a promotional walk from one of the park and stride sites with our mascot Strider, which I think you can see a little tweet there, what I've included. So really that was just to kind of promote it, get parents and families aware of the locations of these sites, get them using them, get them familiar with them. With the advent of the school street being implemented in October, we're probably going to have to do a further push and reminder of these park and stride sites to parents. But having already initiated this process and having raised familiarity with these park and stride locations, it's likely to assist in the success of the school street when it comes into place. So that's everything in a nutshell from me. I'm going to pass over now to Cheryl from ModeShift, who is going to talk about a great tool that you can use to collect data about changing behaviours. So I'll pass over to Cheryl now.
Thanks very much, Dan. I appreciate that. Hello, everybody. My name is Cheryl Ford-Liddon. I'm the STARS Programme Manager for ModeShift. So what is ModeShift? ModeShift is a membership organisation, and our mission is to share best practice in sustainable and active travel. Through STARS, education will provide a tool for schools to develop a travel plan. And ultimately, a travel plan is a summary of actions designed to influence behaviour. So it's all these things that you do, put into one place to have positive outcomes. Next slide, please, Claire. Thank you. So there are just over 24,000 schools in England, and that's 8.74 million pupils with 900,000 teaching staff. So we're talking about a lot of people. So effective school travel planning can hit around 10 million people. So that works out about 18% of the population. So that is a lot of people directly involved in the school run, as it were. Indirectly, it can impact on 20 to 25 million people, which is 36 to 45% of the population. So there really is something to be targeted here. This is something that we all want to make those improvements with. And even going back to the school census data back in 2010, you can see that there was 330,000 car trips made every day for the school run, and under half of those, most of those were under half a mile. So that's a significant amount of travelling by car that potentially can be done through walking, cycling, and other forms of sustainable and active travel. So what does a school travel plan actually do? They can use it, schools can use it to address a whole assortment of issues that affect them. So whether that be road safety, modal shift, environmental concerns, and in particular, school streets, it can be used to encourage active travel and meet planning conditions. And school streets fit so perfectly into travel planning in that sense. And like most things, we're looking to ensure good behavioural change. So we're looking for a travel plan that provides information, so people are aware of what's going on. And we've already had people talk about this, about school streets. Unless you tell people what's going on, how it's going to happen and reach the right people, people aren't going to engage with it. We talk about infrastructure, again, the school streets programme. We talk about cycle storage. We talk about drop curbs, proper signage, improved footways, things like that. We talk about incentives. What do we do to promote children coming to school? And the badges from Living Streets are a great example when they're walking with Strider, positive incentives to get children and parents to walk, cycle, actively travel. And then we need to train children, we need to upskill them. We need to give them things like bikeability cycle training. We need to do child pedestrian training, independent travel training, things like that that really help them to make sensible travel choices, to give everybody more confidence that they're going to be safe traveling to and from school. And travel plans, when delivered effectively, ultimately can significantly improve behavioural change. So it's a positive step all the way. I won't bore you to death with lots of statistics, but it's really important that you can see how we have monitored modal shift through ModeShift over the last few years, and we can genuinely see everything going in the right direction for those schools who are actively engaged in effective travel planning. There's been a 9% decrease in the number of car journeys. There's been a 22% decrease in car journeys in those schools who are doing higher end travel plans. That means that they're very good or they're excellent travel planning. We've seen a significant increase in cycling with schools that do travel planning. We've also seen an increase in walking, both at all levels, right through from good travel plans up to excellent travel plans. So combining it into one concise effort really does make a difference, and the travel data is going in the right direction, increase in sustainable and active and a decrease in unsustainable forms of transport, exactly the direction we're looking to go. Thank you, Claire. And we have a focus on delivery in ModeShift and in our travel plan process. Ultimately, effective travel planning is a continuous process. It's not a one-off. You go round in this cycle of this circle of activities, and I'll let you have a look at the actual the graphic later when you get the slides. But it just continuously planning, delivering and reviewing sustainable travel activity, making those improvements, thinking about what else you need and planning for that moving forward. So it's ongoing. Next slide, please, Claire. Thank you. So how do you get involved, whether you're a local authority or a school? All schools in England are already registered on the ModeShift STARS site. and all Greater Manchester authorities are members. So that's a thumbs up straight away. Local authorities buy an annual membership and an education licence and receive a part of the membership support. So we will help with training, we will help with networking, we will give them advice and provide real case studies and access to resources. We want to help you to be successful, and we're providing a tool to do that. And by having a membership and a licence, local authorities can then support schools in the development of their travel plans, and they can actually start to achieve things. And this is when school travel plan comes in as well. So by doing your travel plan, by developing that, to listing it, to finding all the conduits to make it happen, we can have a successful travel plan, and you can have a successful initiative. And that's me. I'm very quick today, so I hope that's kind of covered everything, and you will get the slides. And I'm going to pass you over to Matt from Sustrans, who's going to tell you all about school streets and how they work from his perspective. Thanks, everyone.
Well, thank you, Cheryl. My name is Matt Pearce, and I'm a Senior Evaluation Officer in Sustrans Research and Monitoring Unit. I managed a Road Safety Trust funded research project that sought to answer the question, do school streets cause traffic displacement that may affect road safety on surrounding roads? For which we collected traffic speed and volume data, video footage and postal data around 2 Birmingham schools at which school streets were being delivered. And we collected data before, shortly after they were delivered, and like a longer term follow-up while they were still being carried out the school streets. Next slide, please, Claire. So what did we find? So in terms of the extent to which traffic displacement is caused by school streets, as the map on the right shows, although there were indications of some roads around the school streets experiencing slight rises in traffic, which are likely to be in part due to traffic displacement, the overall levels of traffic in the local area dropped during school pickup and drop-off times once these school streets were put in place, and that was at both schools. In terms of road safety issues arising from the school street, at both schools there was an increase in the number of informally parked cars near the entrance to the school street, and a higher number of parking cars sort of interacting with other road users, which it highlights a potential risk to road safety. However, we found that the severity of the interactions between road users did not increase, by which we mean that vehicles didn't need to stop more imminently to avoid a collision with another road user than before. And it was essentially, there was normal stopping and manoeuvring behaviour that you would usually see on the road, rather than some large increase in more intense, imminent need to brake or whatever. Next slide, please, Claire. In terms of pedestrian behaviour, at one of the schools that we monitored, at several junctions around the school street, the proportion of pedestrians that had to wait before crossing the road decreased following the implementation of the school street, which suggests that the junctions were easier for pedestrians to cross after it had been implemented. Although it should be noted that on one of the roads parallel to the school street, there was a sort of increase in the proportion of pedestrians having to wait to cross the road. There's just something to keep in mind. In terms of traffic speed, as shown on the map on the right again, data captured at one of the primary schools shows that there was a statistically significant rise in traffic speed on the school street, but also statistically significant reductions in traffic speed on the neighbouring roads. And it's really worth emphasising and mentioning that the increase in average speed on the school street was by 1.86 miles per hour, and that the increase was to 18.2 miles per hour on what was, or what is, a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit road. So there was a change, but it was very small. Next slide, please, Claire. Lastly, in terms of perception of road safety on the school street, our postal survey findings demonstrated strong support for the school street initiative, as well as an overall rise in the proportion of people who believed that the school street road and the surrounding roads were safe, compared to before the implementation of the school street. In addition, a higher proportion of parent and teacher survey respondents perceived that the school entrance was easy and safe to access at follow-up compared to the baseline at both of the schools. And it's just the only thing to note is that the sample sizes for the parent and teacher responses were quite small. But yeah, just a whistle-stop summary really of what we found. So now I'm going to hand you over to Jenny with a reminder of all the things to think about when it comes to school streets.
Thanks, Matt. So I'm Jenny Baby, and I oversee the school streets area of work at Sustrans. We've delivered school streets across the whole UK in various methods, using stewards, barriers, and installing permanent infrastructure, and that's all led by the authorities that we work with. The image in the top left is actually one from Paris that I came across when I was there, and they use staggered gates. It's not something I've seen in the UK, but it would be something quite interesting to see here. So there's lots of different examples here from projects we've worked with. No two school sites are quite the same, so what works for one may not work for the other. It's all very site dependent. Next slide, please. So as part of the project that Matt spoke about, I put together guidance of best practice of school streets aimed at local authorities to use. This came from the experience of monitoring the Birmingham project, as well as from Sustrans colleagues and our best knowledge and experience. The key themes from this, which we've kind of already heard a few times, is communication. So we've mentioned head teacher who needs to be fully committed, as well as talking to the residents, parents, counsellors, volunteers who may become stewards. Alongside communication, behaviour change activities, like again we've heard already, they can be really key and complement a school street and have a really large impact on the school community walking and cycling to school and making that change. The best practice guidance covers 9 topics broken down and includes stewarding, monitoring, behaviour change, and a bit on ANPR, which is a new thing for England. The documents will be linked at the end, and they go into a lot more detail, including a technical report of what Matt covered. But they include a lot of tips that we've already heard, especially I think some that Kaz mentioned. But this is just a highlight sheet of best bits and a lovely quote. So I'll hand back to Claire because I think that's our time.
Brilliant. Well, thanks everyone, and thank you for those of you who are on the call and listening to that. I hope that's given you a sort of really good spread of information. So we've now got just under 20 minutes for questions, and I know lots of questions have been posed in the chat and some are being answered there, which is brilliant. At this point, I am going to invite, if anyone does want to ask a question, could you use the raise hand option in the reactions button and pop your hand up, then I can invite you to speak. If you don't want to actually ask your question out loud, put it in the chat now and I can speak it for you. I know not everybody likes to actually have to do that. Yeah, a reminder, we've got our Jam board as well, which is sort of collecting themes as well, which is quite useful. So if while you're thinking about your own questions, which may build on some of the things in the chat, I've got a couple that I was going to just kick us off with. I think the first one might be for you, Liz, which is just that sort of general, I'm up for it. I'd love a school street at my school. Kind of, where do I start? You know, if I'm in one of the 10 GM councils in one of the boroughs, what should people do if they've heard what they like tonight, and how should they take it forward?
I think the first thing to do would be to try and establish who the contact is in the local authority, and then you could make contact with them and say that you were really keen, explain who you are, whether you are a member of staff or whether you're a resident, or what your position is. I think it's also always really good as well to sort of maybe try and take on the stuff that Kaz has suggested about doing a one-day trial, checking does it actually work, how does it land, how do residents feel, because I think it's really important to be able to demonstrate that the school is on board, that residents are on board, and that it's feasible. And by doing a one-day temporary trial, that could enable you to say, look, this is a bit of evidence. We know that you might not have funding now, but if a school drops out, can you consider us, or can we be put on a waiting list for when more funding is secured? So I'd kind of say, take a leaf out of Kaz's book. One of the things that we will be sending round is a toolkit on how to do as well, what all the things that Kaz has said, and myself and Kaz as well will also be able to sort of answer any questions as well, working through that. Kaz?
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, so Kaz, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just to kind of build on what Liz said, and I think it's not easy, and I did have a little bit of a research actually before this session to see if I could look at the 10 different boroughs and find out how to apply to do a school street. And yeah, there isn't a way of doing it from the website on any of the boroughs. But I think if you do want to do the trial, which any school can do, as I say, you can do up to 3 a year. all you've got to do is get your highways department to issue this temporary traffic regulation order. Now I say all because you won't be able to contact your highways department directly, but if you are stuck, my experience and from the schools we've worked with, it's really good to go through your neighbourhood officer. So your neighbourhood officer or your neighbourhood manager, there's one for every like ward within the borough that you live in. Again, it's not always easy to find out who they are by name, but you can either ring the council's general number and ask for who that is, or if you don't want to do that, if you know who your local councillor is, they will also have contact with that neighbourhood officer. But your neighbourhood officer is the link between the community and the council, and they should be able to get things moving for you, and they will know what the process is for that trial day.
Brilliant, Kaz, thank you. And got another good question in the chat here, which I think I'll come on to, and then Tiffany's got a question. Just before you ask that one, I thought I'd ask Cheryl, could you, because I'm pretty sure that all 10 councils in GM are now part of the Mode Shift programme. So actually, in theory, all schools in GM can access the Mode Shift programme. Are any of you able just to talk about that again? Like, if you're a parent at a school and you're like, well, I've heard about this, but I don't think we're doing it. What should that person do?
I would definitely recommend speaking to your head teacher and saying, this is what I'm interested in doing. Did you know you have access free to Mode Shift? And you need to contact your local authority contacts, and they will support you with the development of your travel plan. And if the local authorities say, I'm a bit confused, I don't know what's going on, which sometimes they do say that, they can come to us, their members, we can support them to get on track so that they know what they're doing. We can offer training so that then they can support schools. So everybody's that line of support is there to help anyone really develop a travel plan.
Brilliant, that's really useful. Right, Tiffany, would you like to ask your question? And Lisa, I've seen yours in the chat and we'll go to that one afterwards if no one else has got a question.
Hi, I just have a question for Living Streets and SESTRAN. So it was really interesting to see kind of the research that you've done with certain schools and the school route audit and the traffic audits. And I guess I'm just wondering how you decide which schools you get involved with to do these audits, or just what that process is for kind of getting connected with either Living Streets or SESTRANS to have some research done on a school route audit. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll start with a response there, Tiffany. With regards to the Guardian Angels school that we did a school route audit with, the school had already been identified through the local council, Bury Council, as a school where they'd like to trial a school route audit. And it just so happened it was a school we were also working with in the delivery of WOW. So through conversations with the school, they felt that it would be really handy for us to do some more intensive work with them. And yeah, that's really how the relationship came about and the delivery of the school route audit with that particular school. So it was, if you like, already earmarked as a school to do a school street. And then we went in and sort of supported that process. And as I say, it's not been implemented yet. It's due to happen in October. But yeah, everything's looking really positive now for that to go ahead.
Thanks, Dan. Did SESTRANS want to come in on that?
I'll jump in unless Matt does. Our project, I know the project that Matt spoke about, that was funded through Road Safety Trust. So it was very specific. We didn't have any officers working on the ground at the schools, whereas in other schools where we do have schools officers doing behaviour change and school streets, it's normally funded by the local authority and they can dictate what they might want in terms of monitoring. So the basic stuff we do is the hands up survey. How do they travel to school? In some projects we've done air quality monitoring, similar kind of traffic road counts to what Matt showed at the Birmingham schools, and I think that's mostly it, hands up surveys. Yeah, it varies per authority what they want. It depends on their kind of overall theme. Yeah.
Thanks, Jenny. So yeah, I mean, that might be something for us to take away into our group, like the monitoring of this and more appetite for that, and it's always useful to prove the benefits. So I'm going to come back to the question. Just going to ask Cheryl to finish up on the mode shift stuff, and then I'm going to talk about the process of closing a school street and what that's like. So Cheryl, there's a question from Jess in the chat about, you just give an idea about, like, because I think if we're trying to get the head teacher on board, the kind of, okay, how long does it take? You know, how much is involved? Jess has asked the question there. So in terms of someone committing to mode shift, like what kind of, how long's a piece of string, I guess, but how much commitment does it take?
It does take a little bit of time, there's no denying that, but because the schools in the Greater Manchester area and the authorities are actively engaged in so many positive transport related activities, actually once you get going and you go through the tabs, you actually can develop a travel plan relatively quickly. There's it's a preformed online document. So literally you would log on and you would go through and you'd fill in the gaps, and there's a checklist box that comes down and you just fill the detail in as you go. And once you've completed that, you save that page and you move on to the next tab. And step by step, you build the process up. Now, it can be done and put it together, and you can do the bare bones of it within about an hour. It doesn't take that long, but it's collecting the evidence of everything that you've done. And the point is, you kind of start thinking about, well, we did a walk last week. 2 months ago, we did a bike breakfast. We work with Living Streets. We work with Sustrans. And you start pulling together all the transport related activities that you do. And it's about thinking about those, and you start collecting dates. Now, that's the bit that tends to take more time, is to go back in time and think about all the great things that you've done. But actually, once it gets underway, you can get the bare bones within a good hour. And then the best way to do it, in my experience, and before I worked at Mode Shift, I was a local authority road safety officer. And this is what I did for many years. So I understand the process very well. It's literally get a little team of people. So whether that be the business manager within the school, whether that be parent governors, whether that be the school children themselves, you know, them involved in their own decision making, and you all pull it together and you all feed it into a process. So it can be quite quick. Especially if you know about what's going on in your area and you're proactively seeking something like a school street and doing a Living Street Walk to School programme and doing a Sustran thing or a Bikeability Trust thing. So actually, once you start getting going, it can be quite a fast process.
Thanks a lot, Cheryl. And obviously,
thank you.
You'll be getting some links and ability to follow up if you want more information. So I thought we'd now move on to just talking about the sort of realities of actually having a school street and what it's like doing a closure and that sort of thing. So Kaz, a good question further up the chat here about, you know, kind of just what's it like, and you know, do some vehicles react negatively, some drivers, and how do you handle that? How do volunteers handle that? I'll just take you off mute.
Okay, sorry, can you just ask me that again? I was just reading something in the chat.
Yeah, it's just a question about the realities of having a school street and you know, what it's like managing that vehicle restriction. Do drivers react negatively? How do you handle that? How do the volunteers cope with that?
So certainly with the trial ones, you have to have a road closed sign across the road during the closure times. So and you have to have volunteers there managing that. So that means that that's really important part of the volunteer briefing, where you're really giving the volunteers that information about how to communicate with people who need to come in and out. And obviously you are letting people through, and we tend to say if we've got enough volunteers, we try and escort them so that they can't speed along that piece of street, because you will find that the children and parents, because the road is closed, they tend to be perhaps a little less aware of traffic. So you want to guide any vehicles coming along there during that time. So that's one thing. Now, when you move on to the more permanent school streets, and this is really what we're going to be experimenting with. So you might have a sort of concrete sign up on the road that says it's a school street zone. Now, I think it was, as Lisa rightly said, that there's nothing to stop people just driving through that if there's no barriers. So it will very much depend on the school. So some schools are sort of, you know, almost in a cul-de-sac where there's not really much need for anyone to get in and out. during that time. And it might be that they either have a barrier during that time, or they have a bollard that comes up and down. And as we move to a more permanent way of doing this, ideally what you want to have is enforcement through cameras. So I think, Liz, you meant, sorry, I'm not sure who mentioned it. Jenny, yes, Jenny mentioned it. So the automatic number plate recognition. So since June, all councils outside of London now have the power to enforce moving traffic offences. So basically, it used to be something to do with the police. Now they can, the council enforcement officers can actually issue tickets and can use cameras to issue tickets, very much like someone going through a set of traffic lights or something. So obviously that's the best answer. It's also the most expensive because we're looking at about £20,000 for a camera being set up for a school street. So I think these are all things that we're experimenting with at the moment to get the best outcome at the least cost. And so there isn't a definite answer. It very much depends on the school and its location and its ability to manage that.
And actually, I might bring Jenny in at this point. And Jenny, you've obviously seen a lot of school streets around the country, and I liked your little holiday snaps earlier of all the different types of things that are in use. So do you have a view on, you know, what are the best ones that you've seen and the ones that you think, oh, actually, that's a really good idea? And what's your take?
I think, like I mentioned, there's no one size fits all. So I'm based in Southampton, so I was a schools officer here and ran multiple school streets, and we now have 2 that are run with bollards in, but they work in those particular sites because there's no residential access needed in the kind of 100 foot space that we've now got, which is traffic free during those school run times. That wouldn't work at the other kind of 12 that they're doing, which is managed by stewards. It just wouldn't work. There's ones in Nottingham which are done with planters. So during the 2020, 2021 times when they were trialling things, they had like the metal barriers you might get around the edge of like marathons and stuff, and they set them up as triangles. They've now replaced them with planters. So that was kind of a very different way. I really like the gate idea I saw in Paris because it still enables people to walk or scoot or cycle through. I think you could probably get a cargo bike through there, but you'd have to make sure that's set properly. But if you do really good communications to parents and the residents and everyone beforehand, like you say, not just on the road that's affected, but neighbouring roads, it can really help. We did a day trial, one of the first ones we ever did, and our barriers didn't turn up. And so we had colleagues standing just on the corners of the road, and it was a small 3 road. Even though they were stood there in high vis, because we'd done so much communications beforehand, hardly anyone came down. We didn't have the signs in, we couldn't do it without, we didn't have the signs. And it's so it really worked. That communications is so important. But we do have a video on how to steward, and there's a bit in that about difficult conversations and positive conversations with people. It doesn't happen often. Out of the, I think I've done like over 30 stewarding shifts in my time, if not more, and I've had 1 or 2 conversations, but it's normally what's going on, or can I get out? Yes, you can. And then they're absolutely fine. But there are some sites where it has been difficult, but that's because of the parent and a particular parent, or they haven't quite understood what's going on, or there haven't been alternatives. So, yeah.
It seems to me that active travel kind of around journeys to school is an area that hasn't necessarily been prioritised for sort of funding in the kind of overall B network and the mission that we've been on to get here. Would speakers here agree that perhaps this is an area that, you know, deserves more focus, and if so, kind of what would you like to see happen? Anyone want to take that one?
I'm happy to start. I suppose I feel like there is quite a lot of funding because I sit within TFGM and I can see what all the pilots that we're doing, but I can definitely sort of agree that compared to the way that things were and the way that things used to be pre-austerity, it is really challenging to get funding, and that a lot of this work is seen as a nice to have. And I think that our challenge is to have these conversations and make sure our local councillors and people like myself who work for people like you know that there's appetite out there, so that we can champion this for you, and that we can make sure that you know that this is put on the agenda and that we tell our seniors about this. I do think that there is a lot of recognition about it. Manchester Council recently passed a motion and they're really keen to do stuff. I think it's about keeping the momentum and not letting it fall to whatever becomes flavour of the year or the decade next year. So yeah, for me, it's about really shouting and making sure that we're the loud, positive voices that are championing everything great that's going on and saying, this is great, we want more of it, and just spearheading that change, like from the grassroots up. We're going to send you around all of these kind of resources, so about the stuff that Dan's spoken about, the reports that Matt spoke about, and also some of the projects that Jenny said that she works on as well. Information about bikeability, which is free to all schools in Greater Manchester. Information about ModeShift, again, free to all schools in Greater Manchester. All of the more detailed information that I completely skimmed over about the projects and programmes that are going on for primary and secondary in Greater Manchester, and a couple more of extra bits and bobs. There's templates that we've referred to, there's toolkits that we've referred to, there's YouTube videos that we refer to. We're going to collate all of these and we'll send them to you.